Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is Professor Gena Gorlin. Hello, Gena. How are you doing?
Hi, doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I am doing excellent, Gena. And do you know why I'm doing so well?
Why is that?
Because you're a brilliant scholar and you're also a builder, and I love builders, Gena. Gena, we're going to talk about success and self-improvement. Is success a destination or a journey?
Um, I think it's both. I think this is something that in our culture we tend to think in a dichotomous way about. This is one thing I addressed in that article, The Builder's Mindset, since you mentioned builders. But the idea that either you focus on the process or you focus on the outcome, or either you focus on the journey or on the destination. But if you think about like a human life, is it is to us, like, is that a nation, right? Well, it certainly has a lot of particular destinations in it. Like, you want to meet someone that you can love and that you can build a home with. You want to create value, right? You want to make great friends. You want to have new ideas. Like, those are all success outcomes, but they all form part of the whole that is a really fulfilling life. So I think it's kind of both.
I like your answer, Gina, but there's a catch. Age 30. Why is 30 such an important age? There are some people, Gina, who assume that by the time that they're 30, they should be a billionaire, they should be a judge, and they should have achieved the entire world. But that's not the reality.
Certainly not for most of us, no. Yeah, it's a good question. Why is 30 such an important age? I guess, I mean, being well over it now myself, I don't really recall life changing too dramatically when I hit 30, but also, and I know this is borne out in the research, people in their 30s tend to be the happiest. And of course, there's a lot of variability, and it's, that's a very noisy statistic. And that doesn't mean that we can't also hit our stride at 50, or, that life goes downhill in any sense from 40. But the fact is that it's pretty arbitrary to say that 30 is the age. Like, the age for what? I mean, especially I think in our day and age, like, that's sort of when most of us are starting our lives, especially now that we can think on a longer
Trajectory, exactly.
who live 200.
So, but Gina, do you know why this question is so interesting and at the same time quite silly? Most people in their 20s, what are they doing? They're students. So you graduate at college at 22 or 25, you get a degree, you may get married or you may get a job. So when you're in your 20s, it is highly unlikely that you're going to achieve all of your goals. So it doesn't make sense to get upset that you're 30 and you have not achieved enough when in your 20s you are basically building that program to achieve at 40 or 50. That's really silly. What can
It's
you
pretty silly.
Some people do achieve at 30 for several reasons. You start a business and the right person decides to become the venture investor. You write an article and the right people see it. Yes, that entails both hard work and luck, but most people are lucky. But for the average writer or entrepreneur, it will take years to truly own his craft. So for instance, the average founder of a unicorn, a company valued at over 1 billion, is in his 30s. The average startup founder is over 40.
Interesting. Wow, that's a really useful statistic. You're right. That really puts it in perspective. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also, I think part of what you're observing is that it so depends on the context of the kind of thing you're trying to build, both narrowly and broadly speaking. If we just think in terms of different kinds of founders and different kinds of entrepreneurial ventures, are you setting your sights on, I've been reading a lot about kind of Jeff Bezos' start as an early, he left, actually, I think he was approaching his 30s, if not already in his 30s, when he left his cushy finance job in New York to start Amazon. And his thinking at the time was, this will probably fail, but I would, when I'm 80, I will look back and I'll regret not having tried. because I can see this future for the internet. I can see, I'm noticing a trend, and it's a trend with a long time horizon, right? That the internet is on its way to changing everything about human interaction and commerce. And I want to ride that wave. I want to see what I can create, right, on that platform. And like that was always going to take a while. And, now he's the richest man in the world. But I don't think he was setting a deadline for himself of, well, I'll only do this if I can be a unicorn by 30. Because then he would have never done it. Right. And I think there are other kinds of businesses where, yeah, you can get that break earlier. Again, partly in the nature of what you're trying to build and over what time frame.
And Gina, I do agree with your perspectives on Jeff. I actually read the book Bezonomics. Did you see that book?
I've seen it. I haven't read it, but perhaps now I will.
Yes, I read the book. And what strikes me is that Jeff is a long-term thinker. Jeff will analyze a situation within a broad time frame, not a 10-year or 20-year, but 50 years or 100 years. He's a long-term thinker. And as such, Jeff Bezos, his end goal is really to create value. You create wealth by investing in value creation. If you start a business to make money, more than likely it will fail because opportunity-driven businesses are interested in maximizing value. Necessity-driven businesses tend to be owned by hustlers who want to make money. So Jeff Bezos has a long-term thought process.
Definitely. And it's the same thing for, you don't hear of as many like writers and philosophers and historians under 30 who were already famous, right? As you do like tech founders who like struck big, and kind of hit that first really impressive venture. And again, I think there are reasons. I think it takes longer to become a really great writer and to accumulate the knowledge base and to accumulate the skills and the network and the life experiences, right, that will eventually allow you to change the world with your writing. So it's just really, I just don't think having any sort of single heuristic in our minds of, okay, by this age, I need to have been this successful. It doesn't mean anything unless you're really thinking in the context of your life and goals.
But Gina, many writers who achieve great success in their 30s or even 20s, they started to write when they were pretty young. It's just like YouTubers. The famous YouTubers today were doing YouTube in high school.
Oh, that's a good point.
So overnight success is really rare.
Indeed. At any age, indeed. And I think, it's the same, with writers. I know a small crop of great writers who didn't start really writing until later in life, but you're absolutely right that that's the exception, right? And I think it's always a question. Okay, it's not. There's no like absolute rule written in like the fabric of the universe that if you haven't started by 20, then you can't do this anymore. But there are real constraints to think about, right? Like if you haven't become an Olympian by age 20, and if you're in a sport that is inherently, that requires the kind of endurance and the kind of physical prowess that is much, much harder to acquire from scratch at 20 than at, starting at age 5. Yeah, like you want to weigh that in your calculations of how you want to invest your time, where you want to create value and joy, right? So it's just so context dependent at the end of the day.
Gina, tell us a little about your work on self-improvement, coaching, and leadership.
Sure. I could talk about it all day, so cut me off whenever. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. I'm a professor at Yeshiva University where I teach and train and do research with future psychologists in training. And lately, what I've found myself really gravitating toward ambition and of what I've called self-creation. So really working with people, founders especially, but certainly not exclusively, who are trying to chart their own course, trying to really blaze their own trail and facing a lot of the psychological challenges that are inherent in any such work, right? The fact that lots of people are going to disagree with you, the fact that you're going to be wrong a lot, the fact that you're going to fail and you're going to have to start over and you're going to have to keep perspective, even though there's nobody to sort of create those guardrails for you other than yourself, right? Like everyone's going to think you're crazy, whether you in fact are crazy or not. If when you say, I'm going to quit my finance job and try to make an internet bookstore, to come back to our Bezos example, right? It's going to sound crazy at the time, but it's really up to you and your judgment to really do an honest inventory of like, what do I actually know? And what do I believe? Why do I believe it? What am I risking? And what is the upside? So I've really been specializing in helping people really internalize the mindset that I think we need in order to do that well, which includes things like earning our own trust, like practicing self-honesty, practicing radical candor, starting with ourselves, not letting anything, really catching ourselves in all the little ways that we self-deceive and try to either get away with pretending to ourselves that we know more than we do or less than we do, so pretending like we've made an assessment of risk when really we're just selectively noticing, the positive signals. And also really thinking about, well, why do we need self-trust? Because a lot of people out there believe that, of course, founders have to self-deceive, to do anything great and ambitious, you have to be totally deluded because otherwise you would never do it. And I don't think that that's right at all. So, I've really been pushing back on that narrative. And also just helping people manage the anxiety and the stress that inevitably accompanies any ambitious venture, right? Helping people to develop the people skills and the ability to keep long-term perspective in mind, while also staying grounded and staying sort of anchored in your own experience in the present and being able to draw on both data sets, right? The kind of the data set that you get by really introspecting. Hello?
Hello, Gina. You can
Hello,
just
Lipton?
continue, please. You are speaking about your
Hello?
job and I can hear you, Gina.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can? Okay, yeah,
you can
looks
just
like you
continue.
got disconnected.
Yes,
Okay,
unfortunately.
do you know, that's okay. What's the last thing you heard, if you recall?
You are saying that successful people ought to be more calculated. That's what you were saying.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember exactly
Yeah, so the
where in that
argument,
point.
let me explain what you're saying. You are arguing that when one decides that he or she's going to become really successful, the stereotype is that these successful men and women are overconfident and arrogant and they know a lot, but in reality they must temper their expectation and appreciate what they don't know and what they ought to know.
Okay, yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, so that's one point. And I guess after that, I was just saying, I also just work with founders and ambitious people on managing their stress and anxiety and really understanding their emotions and being able to dialogue with their emotions without being controlled by them. Developing the people skills to both be really persuasive and to say no, and to build relationships and build, genuine kind of loyalty and investors and customers, relationships that can last through the thick and thin of these kinds of ventures and so on.
Gina, no, that's an important word. When should people say no?
Well, in a lot of contexts, I mean, I guess, let me just think what part of which sort of class of examples to focus on here. So I recently saw a really great, maybe this was a Twitter thread actually, about the power and the importance of saying no, or maybe an article for founders, but just how different people's expectations are of what happens when we say no compared to the reality, where, people will take on projects and so grant requests, right? And kind of bend over backwards, whether with colleagues, with family, et cetera, when it doesn't actually serve their needs, when it's not actually their top priority. And I think what actually happens is that you build resentment on all sides and that you end up kind of half-assing it because, you would rather be doing something else, or you end up really kind of holding in a lot of your kind of building frustration with the person that you're saying yes to when really the answer should have been no. And everybody loses from that kind of arrangement in the long term. So I guess, say no when you mean no, right? Which means when it's actually not in your considered best interest, all things considered, when the value exchange is actually not an equitable one. Because, and sort of remembering in those cases that my mantra is it's either win-win or lose-lose. That human relationships, at least over time, they're either win-win or they're lose-lose. That there's no such thing really as win-lose. Any temporarily win-lose relationship is really just a lose-lose relationship, as long as that differential doesn't get addressed.
Gena, I am going to give an example that's quite hilarious. So as a writer,
Sure.
you must produce quality content. I don't like to make grammatical errors. I don't like it when other people make grammatical errors, and I'm big on data, so my articles are often hyperlinked. However, I'm a bit new to YouTube, yet quality is still important. If you're doing a Zoom video, people like not only the quality of the content, but the optics and the aesthetics. But at some point in your career as a podcaster or influencer, one has to say no to the expectations of others. Let me give you a perfect example. I'm an upcoming YouTuber. I think that you are a fascinating academic and you're busy. So today we're doing a YouTube show. And for a few seconds, Zoom was being annoying. Am I going to decide to start over the show? No, Gena, I'm going to continue. It's
That's
about
a great
time.
example.
Yeah, it's about time. It's really infuriating that the audio might not be as clear as as we need it to be, but time is an important constraint. So today we speak, tomorrow we may not be able to speak. In May, we may not be able to speak. You are in demand and I want you on my show. When you come on my show, I can invite other people and say, Gena Gorlin was a guest. Yes.
That's awesome.
So I do care about the quality, but when Zoom gets annoying, I just move on. I have to just say no.
That's a great example. It's funny. That's an example of another point that I often make and sort of work through with founders and others, is that the way we think about perfectionism, which I think is what you're getting at. Like, you could be really perfectionistic about, oh no, I need the perfect sound quality. I need, no mistakes in my show, or else I have to start over. But the way I reframe that is that real perfectionism, in the sense that, like, that's actually your ideal and you're like deciding to fall short of it? Or are you actually keeping your real ideal in mind? Like, your ideal, in the sense of like your goal, the thing that's important to you, the thing you want to build, is not a show without sound glitches, right? It's a large following on YouTube based on really interesting conversations with interesting people. And by that standard, the right move is not to start over and potentially, have to lose half the interview or just not get as much good content, right? Like, the right move is to accept the glitches for the sake of the greater value that you want to create.
Exactly. So our listeners, obviously they don't know it, but today you're a bit busy. You're going to be carrying your dad somewhere. So I can't start over.
That's true, I am. And I thank you for your consideration.
It's just life. Like, and again, outcomes are really important. Sometimes, if you're a perfectionist, it clearly means that you're not going to achieve. Your first article won't be great. The first business will flop statistically. So what are you going to do? Just dream? No, you have to start at some point.
That's right. That's so important. And I think that also gets at, a principle that entrepreneurs often invoke, which is action bias, right? Or bias to action. The idea that we can dream all we want. Dreaming doesn't actually translate into ambition. It doesn't translate into success if we don't act on it, right? And acting on it just is really messy and really imperfect and largely trial and error. And that's what it looks like to actually be trying for a dream, right? Like, it doesn't look like sitting there and fixing typos all day, much as we might sometimes like to think it does.
I'm not autistic. I was never diagnosed, but I would say that I'm more on the rational side of life. I'm a bit cold, but during the time I spent reading various books and articles, it became evident that people like vulnerability. So when you prove to people that you are imperfect, and that you also fail, they will appreciate your show even more. So I have a stutter. I don't really like the stutter. I think that I'm a better writer than speaker. When I'm speaking, I can sound a bit convoluted. I don't like to stutter, but I guess this show is proving to people that even if you have a speech impediment, you should still start a YouTube channel.
I mean, I didn't notice any speech impediment for what it's worth. Maybe that's just not what I focus on, but
Yes,
good for
yeah.
you.
But people like vulnerability. The real world is messy.
That's right.
The real world is messy. People get uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to speak to you, because success has its pros and its cons. Back to we're now going to transition to talk about a more pointed issue still on the topic of success. And
Sure.
during your earlier speech, you mentioned it. Crazy. How crazy should one become to attain stratospheric success?
Oh, crazy. So, I mean, it's a term with a number of meanings. So I want to make sure I'm addressing the right one. But I think if we mean, so when I originally said it, I think I had in mind like you have an idea that A is just so different from what anybody's tried. And that sounds just like the harebrained schemes of people who, tell us a million times, oh, I'm doing this amazing thing. I figured it out. And then it's, it never comes to anything. So there's a question of, well, is it actually just a harebrained scheme? Or like, do you have an insight? Right. So, I mean, when Elon Musk decided he was going to send humans to Mars using privately funded spacecraft, right? Like that sounded really crazy to people, but he has a way of taking crazy ideas like that and actually figuring out a way to execute on them, right? So that it doesn't seem so crazy now. I mean, he hasn't done it yet, but he's done a lot of things along the way that make it seem like maybe he could actually succeed. Or when Galileo said the earth was round, that probably sounded crazy and even heretical, right, to a lot of people in his surroundings, but he had an insight, he had evidence, he wasn't just basing that on his fancy. So there's that sense of crazy, in which case I don't think it's actually at all crazy to kind of have that kind of insight if you're actually onto something, and if you're acknowledging the margins of uncertainty, right, which I think we had mentioned earlier. Like, Bezos gave a 30% probability to Amazon succeeding when he was getting started, right? So he wasn't claiming to know for sure, but he did have a strong belief in the future of the internet, and it was worth taking that shot. So I think that's one thing. If you mean crazy in the sense of like having mental health issues, that's sort of a different matter, and one I also am intimately acquainted with, and where I got my start was helping people with mental health challenges. And I guess how crazy to let yourself be is sort of, again, a really contextual question of like, what can you get away with? What serves you and what is a liability? Like, how is it getting in your way, right? Often you can get away with being a lot crazier than whatever the kind of popular conception of the norm. But then again, there are certain kinds of crazy that are really going to cost you. Like if you have untreated bipolar disorder and every now and then you go on a spending rampage and, use up all your savings or all of your capital, as the case may be. Does that,
Yes,
am I answering your question?
You answered the question well, Gina, and I like the discourse because it shows that we're not perfect people. So I'm expecting this show to generate millions of views, but then again, that's unrealistic. YouTube could be trying to sabotage me, Gina. So you may not know, but I interviewed some really controversial people. So YouTube sent me an email warning me that I'm going to be flagged, or I could become flagged.
Wow.
Yeah, so even if I interview someone who's really famous these days, I could get only 10 views. I think I'm being sabotaged, but who cares?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but
Yeah.
happy that you are persevering and
Yes,
not letting this
I've
deter you.
interviewed some really radical men and women with somewhat outrageous doctrines, but such is life. Not all of us are going to be normal.
That is true. I mean, again, that's true. And it's a case by case judgment, I would say, of, if there's something really damaging about it, or, if it's just quirky.
Gina,
But yeah, go ahead.
what do you think
Yeah.
about cliches that don't make much sense? Like this popular cliche, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. Does that cliche make sense? I don't think it's sensible. Let me tell you why.
Mhm.
I'm civil. I like to be civil, not because it's fine, not because it's beneficial, but being civil is greater than a protocol. If you're a human being, act like a human being. Humans are supposed to be civil. However, it's more important to be influential. When you're important, you will get access to nice people, and people will feel compelled to be nice. Being nice is not a moral statement. Being
Yeah, I
nice
don't
does
know what
not
it means.
exactly. Being nice does not suggest that you're adding value. So I'm going to say it's really okay to be nice, but it's better to be important. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I'm with you on your first statement that like it's not that coherent, because I get what it's getting at. I think like if when you're in a conflict between like chasing status versus like actually genuinely doing good or genuinely connecting with people, yeah, like that's a case where you might rethink the importance of status if it's coming at the cost of like genuine connection, or genuine positive sort of relationships. But I don't think that the saying is clear enough that we can assume that that's what it means, right? Like it could also just mean like, don't upset people too much with your controversial endeavor. Like, is Elon Musk like, nobody would say Elon Musk is observing this saying, I assume, right? Like he would probably be like the arch enemy of this expression, but like he's probably done more good. Certainly, just recently for the people of Ukraine by giving them Starlink so that they have reliable internet access while being
Yes, that's
attacked by
been
Russia. Like, is that nice? I think that's pretty freaking nice,
yeah,
right?
it
But
is.
that's not,
It's
but it doesn't
valuable.
count on this kind of ethos.
It's valuable. But
Yeah.
Elon Musk said that he wants to send the people to the moon. So obviously he's not a chill guy.
He's not chill.
Yeah, so
Definitely not.
Elon wants to be judged based on achievement and not prestige. So some cultures are prestige oriented, not necessarily achievement oriented. Elon Musk is respected because of his achievements, not due to his personality. Back to the Ukraine issue. My position on Ukraine is quite clear, Gina. When I was a student of international relations, we were taught that for the most part, small countries don't have significant clout, but some middle powers might have clout, and small countries can exert soft power. But I live in the real world. Some of Putin's supporters are saying that no, Putin does not want to restore the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. The West is just picking on Putin. But let's put all of that aside. Real politics. Russia is a superpower in Eurasia. That's Russia's backyard. I believe that countries have a right to self-determination. So obviously I don't support an invasion. But the West, for some time, countries in the West like America and their collaborators, they have been encouraging Ukraine to engage NATO and the EU, knowing Putin's personality. Putin, in a sense, is still living in the 19th century. So Putin will invade a country. You know that Putin will invade a country if he's provoked. Yet you encourage Ukraine to engage the EU and the NATO, knowing that America and their partners are not going to send soldiers to fight the war in Ukraine. They may provide assistance, but it will not become an American war. So knowing all of these variables, posting on Twitter that you stand with Ukraine is not very nice. Now is the time for a truce. Ukraine cannot fight a war with Russia. And we know this, and we know Putin's personality. So
So
that's not
I
very
should
nice.
probably, so I really have no expertise on political and geopolitical matters. I have a personal connection to Ukraine that perhaps makes me even less of an objective public commentator on this subject. So perhaps I should quite simply abstain, but what I will
Okay.
say is that
I look
I
at
have
it, yeah.
found very inspiring some of the ways that Ukraine has stood up for itself and surprised the world
Yes.
in its determination and its fight for freedom
Yeah,
and its courage.
people admire what Ukraine is doing. The leader, he presents himself as brave and serious. And if I were the leader of Ukraine, I wouldn't want to look weak. So would I say, let's call a truce? Maybe not, because leaders don't want to appear to be weak. But at the same time, people in the Western world, people like us, many of us, we know Putin's personality. We know Putin's personality, and yet Ukraine was still encouraged to not to start a fight, but to provoke him. But as you said, this is not a geopolitical conversation. My own point is that saying that you stand with Ukraine, knowing the history of Ukraine's relationship with the West and Putin's personality, doesn't make you a nice person.
Yeah, again, I won't comment on sort of like global kind of geopolitical hypotheses about like the various causes of this war. But what I will say, I guess, that there's a way to read what you're saying that, at least metaphorically, we could analogize to, the kind of smart geeky kid who's being bullied by the kind of Attila the Hun kid in 4th grade, and the parents' advice to the smart geeky kid is like, quit raising your hand, quit participating, quit being yourself, because don't you know that that's just going to provoke this bully? And that worries me.
Yeah, it is worrying, because if you're stifling your self-expression to appease a bully, in the long term you're going to be worse off. But it's a complicated situation. Yes, you want to express yourself, but the bully is going to beat you up.
Well, there are different approaches, certainly on the schoolyard, to dealing with that kind of situation, and I am much less of an expert in sort of how those principles translate to the geopolitical context. Yes. But I do know that appeasing bullies, though in the short term it may feel safer, has not proven over history to be the wisest course. So that doesn't mean that I know, what's right to do instead.
I'm laughing, Gena, because the situation will always become complicated. Yes, you don't want to appease the bully, but at the same time, no one is going to say, do you know what? We just have to kill the bully.
Well, hopefully someone, if only among those close to him, will.
All right. Yeah, but
so,
I don't like wars. I don't like wars, and most people really don't like wars, because people in Ukraine are dying. We don't want people to die. We don't want children to lose their fathers. It's a really tricky situation. Yeah, no one wants people to die. And sanctions usually hurt the suffering people, not the leaders. Ordinary people, they are disadvantaged by the sanctions, because someone like Putin is not a character you can spite. He does not care. So
can I request that we just shift away from politics? Is that all right with you?
No,
thank you. It's just not really my area of expertise. So
I appreciate it. Not a problem. Yeah.
Thanks.
So on the question of success, but Gena, you might not have appreciated that part of the discussion, but I really love your analogy of the bully, because your bully analogy is really powerful. That nearly destroyed my argument, the analogy of the bully. When should we really stand up to bullies? In the workplace, bullies exist.
Indeed.
Yeah, so when should we really stand up to the bully? If your boss is problematic, what should you do?
I think we should stand up to bullies as early and as often as we're able. And I think there are different ways to stand up to bullies, that some ways are much more effective than others. And this is where I think learning and practicing assertive communication skills and healthy boundary setting are just really valuable, in terms of just being able to communicate in a really clear and straightforward and non-combative, but also non-defensive way. This is what I will accept. This is what I will not accept. This is how your words or actions are affecting me. And these are my terms and this is what I'm asking for, right? There are ways to communicate those things that certainly won't guarantee a change in behavior or a particular, particular course of action by the bully or whoever it is you're standing up to, but make it a lot more likely that you succeed. And but also partly do that by bringing out the best in people rather than sort of aggravating the worst in them. And most people, if you're working for someone, of course, there are exceptions where they just, your employer just turns out to be rotten to the core, but more often than not, people are kind of mixed and they have better parts to them and less great parts to them. And there's a lot that you can do to bring out the better parts and kind of put boundaries on the ruder or the more like insecure, defensive, aggressive parts. So I think that's a big part of it.
Bullies. Gina, how do I deal with bullies? Personally, I develop a well, I'm not really being bullied at the moment, and usually if I'm encountering a bully, I can fight back. But these days, Gina, I have just decided that it is better to remove the waste from your life. I have a friend, she's a management consultant, and she has taught me that you see life clearly when you get rid of toxic people, and it has been working for her. And after I listened to her, it started to work for me. So personally, these days, I just get rid of toxic people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you determine that certain people are toxic in your life, then I absolutely, I think that that's sometimes the right move. And for some people, I think it's the absolutely essential move, given sort of the context of their life and kind of what patterns they've been stuck in to date and what they tend to have trouble saying no to and so on. And then I would say there are other people who might be too quick to write someone off as toxic. And then I might have different advice for them. And I think to figure out, well, which one are you and or just which situation is this? Because you could imagine sometimes it going both ways. I think there are real skills of both self-reflection to figure out like, well, what am I feeling and why am I feeling it? And what assumptions am I bringing to this? Like, did they actually mean by this what I'm assuming they did? And then also communication and reflective listening skills to be able to actually elicit from people, like, what do they mean and what is motivating their actions? Because that's often, we're more often wrong about those things than we are right, just in general about other people, because it's just really hard to, read each other's minds.
Again, I have another question, Gina.
Mm-hmm.
How important is tact?
Tact?
Yes.
In what context? I know it's infuriating how I always say it depends, but
in the workplace, in having a conversation, just living in life, how is it important for us to be tactful? It took me years to develop that skill.
Yeah, I guess again, if we define it, depending how we define, like sometimes I hear it defined like in contrast to honesty, in which case I don't think that that's the right definition. Like I don't think being dishonest is ever tactful, even though that's probably, the more controversial view. But I think there's tact. I think there's a really legitimate and important sense of tact, which is really like, it's the demonstration in action of like valuing other people and valuing your relationships with other people and being attuned to other people's needs and perspectives and circumstances. So I think, like being thoughtful about what we say or how we say it, and partly incorporating our awareness of, well, what is this actually going to mean to the other person? And what hurts for the person right now? And can I say this in a way that doesn't cause needless pain? Right? Or can I say this in a way that also respects the person's autonomy and the fact that, they don't have to interact with me if they don't want to? Like, can I sort of honor the investment of time they're putting in or whatever the situation? But I think a lot of it just comes down to being a thoughtful human valuer, like thoughtfully engaging with other human beings. Does that I don't know. Is that what you had in mind by
Yes,
tact?
yes, Gina. There's a some people, Gina, might not have a sophisticated understanding of autonomy. So physical space, that's direct autonomy. If I touch you and you don't want to be touched, I am violating your physical space. But autonomy is a broader concept. There's autonomy in the realm of ideas. So if I am imposing doctrines on you and you strongly object to the imposition of said doctrines, I'm violating your autonomy. And
Yeah, in what sense are you imposing them on me? I guess would be one question I would ask.
Yeah, so for example, Gina, earlier in the conversation when we were talking about Ukraine, you said you're not a geopolitical expert. Let's move on. Suppose I did not move on.
Okay, that's a good example.
Yeah, suppose I did not move on, and then it all boils down to tact. I didn't know that you were close to Ukraine. If I had known that, I would not have mentioned the issue.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's totally fair. And yeah, I mean, that's a good example. Like just sort of taking that into account and updating your approach. Sure.
So, and you look, it's more than just hurting people's feelings. It's a matter of respect. So who are you, Gina? You're my guest. I need you. I'm investing in you. You're like equity. When I say I interview Gina, people are going to come on the show because Gina is a woman psychologist with a growing brand. And she's meeting with builders. So I have Gina on my show. So I have to respect Gina. I was on a show once, Gina, and you can reserve your comment. And if you decide to do so, you may reserve your comment or you may give an opinion. I was being interviewed once, Gina, and the guest, she started the interview by saying your views are backward. Gina, isn't that stupid?
It doesn't seem like a great interview tactic, for
Exactly.
sure. I would agree with you there. Seems like not the best way to establish rapport with an interviewee, admittedly.
Yes, somebody actually did that. The interview went well. I won't be interviewed by her again. She's not worth my time, but how could people just be so low?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of these things, I'm always harping on context and this and that. Like there are certain things that aren't context dependent because they're just principles. But like most things, I would say I need a bit more context. Like that sounds like something that would almost always be wrong to do as an interviewer. And like I'd have to really think of a context where that becomes somehow a good idea. Like if you're, like if you've already done a lot of interviews or public appearances with the person and you've established a certain rapport. And so in a way, it's like you're starting mid-conversation, right? And you've already kind of established that you have this repartee where you like to rib on each other, where you kind of play devil's advocate to each other's views. And that's actually a way to kind of bring out each other's intellectual chops or to hold each other accountable, right? Or the person just generally has that kind of like invites that kind of controversy or that kind of provocative style, and the interviewer has done their homework to know this, and therefore they're taking a bet or making a bet, taking a risk that, okay, let's see how this goes, right? But in most circumstances, that seems like the wrong way to start an interview.
Yes, but we're going to move on and continue to talk about success. Gina, two questions. So question number one, what are the pitfalls of success? And question number two, you were hinting at the matter, but we didn't delve into it. How can one become a builder? Two questions.
Ooh, okay. Two big questions. So let's see, to take the first question. So the pitfalls of success. I mean, I guess again, lots of things to say here, depending on how we're defining terms. Like if we just take success in the legitimate, like kind of thick sense of the term, like you are actually achieving things that make you happy and that you want to achieve and that create value in the world based on your own sort of, judgment and standards and values. That still comes with costs, of course, right? Like doing anything great, usually it takes a lot of time, and it means that you have to say no to a lot of other things, like, if it's really important to you to start a family by a certain time, or to make a lot of time for your spouse or kids, or to meet a partner, and you might be trading off some of that flexibility and some of that headspace for the sake of whatever ambitious success you're pursuing, right? And there are definitely just the stresses that come with wanting something that's both hard to get and that it's high stakes, right? Like you're going to experience a lot more stress in your life if you become an ER physician or a surgeon than if you become an accountant, right? Like, but all else being equal, like you're asking for a more stressful line of work. You're going to see people die. You're going to sometimes fail to save them. You're going to be asked to come in and work night shifts, and right, there's just nothing that would make it easy. And all things considered, that might be worth it to you, right? It's worth it to a lot of people. But those are the kinds of trade-offs that and calculations that I think people need to make when they choose to go into that kind of work or pursue that kind of success. So that's one. And then there's just the question of like, well, is this actually real success? Like success defined how, right? Or are you chasing something based on prestige or status, like something you don't actually love and don't actually want, in which case, you know, in the end, it's almost all downside with very little upside, I would say.
All right. And are you going to talk about the second question now? How to become a builder?
Oh, that's right. Thank you for reminding me. I mean, in a way, my whole newsletter is designed to gradually provide bits and pieces of an answer to that question. So building the builders, which I think that was how we connected through that newsletter. And my whole career in a way is about it. But I guess if I were just to synopsize, like what are the main principles? I think it's developing the kind of founder's mindset or builder's mindset that comes with both a kind of confidence and a willingness to do really hard work, a kind of an appreciation and respect for the work of doing something great, of building something that's valuable, and an unwillingness to kind of sign up for work that you actually don't see as worth doing, right? So it's sort of like the two sides we've been talking about. It's like being able to say no to the things that don't actually serve your vision and your values, and being willing to say yes and to really commit and to really kind of give all you got for the things you say yes to, for the things that are worth building kind of in your own eyes. And that includes a lot of the, you know, learning and the stress and the trial and error and the sort of owning your mistakes and just like the being really confused and having to spend a lot of time kind of slogging through, you know, research or slogging through whatever kind of like skills you have to build up along the way, and sort of learning to love all of that if it is part of the journey that gets you to what you want to build.
Yes. If you're going to build a project, no matter how minute it may appear, you have to remain committed and serious. Building, again, Gena, how important is networking when you're a builder? Is networking really overrated?
I used to think so. And then I sort of had to admit to the people who kept pushing it on me that, oh, okay, maybe it's actually, you know, worth more than I let on. But I mean, again, it just really depends. Like, what are you trying to build and for whom, right? Because presumably, I mean, I think it's important to think about your market, right? Like, for whom am I trying to create this value? Like, who am I going to trade with, right? To actually kind of leverage the value of what I'm creating, to actually sort of see it through, right? To where it's actually like bringing value in the world. Like that means I have to sell people on it. That means I have to figure out the right people, you know, to whether to bring on as investors or as collaborators, or like if it's anything, if what you want to build involves other people at any point, you're going to need to do some networking at some point, right? And almost anything you build is going to involve other people in our division of labor society, right? Like it's unlikely that it's going to bring much value even to you if you're doing it completely sort of like in isolation and never show it to anyone.
But the catch, Gena, is that if you want to meet important people, you have to work. After achieving, then you will begin to meet important people. Showing up at a networking event may not be as productive as some people think.
Totally fair. Yeah, definitely it does not substitute for the work. I think that is a very key point to remember. And that's true for anything that might be like this particular thing that you do. This particular, you know, it's sort of like anything that starts to feel like that you start to hold as a quick fix, right? Or as like a cure-all or like a shortcut, that's probably a sign that you're holding it wrong, right? And that it's sort of like standing in for the real work that you would be doing instead if you weren't trying to get that kind of quick fix, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm really enjoying the conversation, Gina, but again, I'm not a perfectionist, but I'm really hard on myself, Gina. I don't like to make silly errors, and I still regret bringing up the Ukraine issue.
You please don't beat yourself up about that, Lipton. You were very tactful about it, as we discussed, and it's really okay. It's much more so. I'm not upset. I just want to make sure that I don't kind of misrepresent to your audience what may or may not be my considered views and considered judgment, and so it's much more an act of consideration for the listeners, but I also. Anyway, so being hard on yourself, that is definitely a common theme among the builders I work with.
Yes, Gina, but because of your lovely personality, I can feel comfortable moving on. Now we're going to talk about stress. So Patrick Bet David, he wrote a book recently and he has a YouTube channel, and Patrick Bet David gave an example of a man. So the person worked, he was a good employee, but his passions were elsewhere. So Patrick said, what do you really want to do with your life? And the guy said, well, I want to be comfortable so that I'll be able to take care of my family. And Patrick Bet David said, okay, this is a big problem, Gina. If your goal is to be comfortable, don't strive to become an Elon Musk, because they're always going to be unhappy.
No, well, so I agreed with you right up to the end. Yeah, so definitely don't strive to be Elon Musk if you want to be comfortable. 100%. Happiness, depends on our definition again, and I tend to have sort of non-mainstream definitions or conceptions of some of these terms. Happiness is among them. But if we just mean like happiness in the sense of like chill contentment without having too many cares in the world and without anything being, too upsetting to us, then yeah, don't be an entrepreneur. That's not the way to that kind of life.
But there's a downside again. Yes, you want to be comfortable. I'm not envious, but some comfortable people are envious. They're not willing to work as hard as Gina, but when Gina becomes a billionaire, they get upset. So what should those people do?
I mean, I guess if I'm addressing them directly, then I might suggest some self-reflection on what's really driving that jealousy, and if there's a double standard somewhere in their thinking and in their psyche such that they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too, right? And then really reflecting on, well, what do I actually want more, given that this, I can't have my cake and eat it too. I can't have my lunch without paying for it. So do I want it? In which case, am I willing to do the work, or can I accept that that's just not what I've chosen, right? That's not the life I want.
It's really irritating. It's like when I'm online and people talk about billionaires, or BuzzFeed published this stupid article some time ago saying celebrities who don't deserve their fame. If you want to be a celebrity, work hard. Try. Don't just, let me tell you, some people want the lifestyle of the celebrity without the work. That's the problem. Lazy people.
I mean, here's the thing. There are plenty of celebrities who are really flaky and who did get there by luck. And frankly, I'm not that jealous of those people. Those people have a higher than average suicide rate and exactly. Not much to aspire to, right? So I think part of this is just keeping in perspective, like happiness doesn't come free, no matter your station in life, no matter how famous you are, right? Like these principles apply universally to human beings, and that you don't just get exempt from them because you hit 10,000 Twitter followers, or because, you end up on a front page tabloid or whatever. It's not how it works.
I'm happy that you brought up the suicide rate. Another catch-22, a tricky situation. John Brown is successful, but is he also on drugs? Yes. So you want John Brown's success, not knowing that he's suffering.
Yeah. I think that's an example of people having not a lot of perspective on the people that they sort of mock and deride. I mean, this, in a way, to me, this connects back to the bullying conversation, because it's really easy to bully people that you've dehumanized, right? Like people who are kind of just like pinup dolls in your mind, right? Like where you don't really think of them as having full kind of three-dimensional, human lives and souls and concerns and struggles. And I think that happens often for people who become, a certain amount of famous, a certain amount of wealthy, like they kind of get dehumanized in a lot of people's minds. And I think that can often be quite tragic. I think of Marilyn Monroe, who had just a really tragic story that, ended very tragically as well. And just, they don't think really ever found a kind of community of people who viewed her as fully human. And it's really devastating to kind of read that story. And she was also extremely sexualized, and she was never taken seriously as an actress, even though she really worked her butt off to perfect her craft, and just so many different kind of dimensions of that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing with a lot of what's his name? Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing that I can't even. Kanye West.
Kanye West. Oh yes, Kanye.
Yeah, it took me a minute. It's just another example where people can comment with impunity on their latest take on his hilarious hijinks of saying crazy things on Twitter and suddenly deciding he's going to run for president and all these. But to anyone watching from a kind of mental health standpoint, I mean, this is someone who clearly is struggling with mental health issues, someone who also is making choices, and someone who isn't therefore, he's not, I wouldn't view him as just a kind of helpless victim of his illness or his circumstances. But the fact is that it's really, really complicated what he's dealing with. And it has complicated and serious and tragic costs. And I think it's too easy for people to just treat it lightly.
Yeah. Look, Kanye West is a creative genius, and the man is obviously suffering from some rather unbearable issues. It's quite obvious. I am not privy to these issues. You may not be privy, but he has a problem.
It was the same when, I don't know if you remember the gymnast, Simone
Biles. Yes, I commented on her story. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know what your take on it was, but I think just it's another example of people all suddenly jumping in and sharing opinions of what she should or shouldn't have done, and whether or not it was legit for her to bow out of the final competition, and as if they have any clue what actually happened in her life and what she's dealing with and what it means to have the whatever they were called, not the jitters, that there's this very specific experience gymnasts have that's sensory motor, where they kind of lose their ability to, I don't remember the details, I won't even, I'll just say it wrong, but it's a specific kind of issue that sometimes arises for gymnasts when they're doing a certain kind of routine, or in certain contexts where it actually becomes unsafe for them to get on the beam or whatever it may be. And even there, I don't know if I said any of that right. I don't know what the kind of full context of the situation was, but the point is that everybody immediately presumed to know. And I think it on both sides, people who were saying good for her, she's such a champion on behalf of mental health advocacy, and that's how we should all be, we should all put our mental health, you don't know. And same for the people who were actually deriding her and saying, well, she should have put America for, or not, wait, was she American? See, this is how much
Biles, yes, she's an American.
Yeah, she was American. This is the extent of my my distance from politics. But yeah, she was weak and she should have persevered, and she represents our country, and how dare she put herself, just all the commentary on both sides, I think was an example of people dehumanizing the famous and the exceptional, right? In a way that makes it sort of unnecessary to gather the facts or to reserve judgment as we would for a friend.
Superficial misjudgment, and I'm deliberately employing the word superficial. Issue number one: One can argue that this generation is relatively weak, but even if this assertion is true, Simone Biles is an individual. If she does not want to run, that is not the business of the American people. That's not their business. You don't exist to serve your country. You create
Right.
value, but you don't exist to serve your country. And this is why Ayn Rand is so important. Do you like Ayn Rand?
I do. I'm a fan. No secret.
How does she, how do you relate Ayn Rand to your work?
It's a great question that surprisingly few people ask me. Lots of ways, although often it's kind of more implicit and more in the background for me as a general perspective. So probably the most important ways that her work is impacting me now in my work, there are a couple of ways. One is that she kind of presents this third alternative between, on the one hand, what I now call it in my newsletter, like the drill sergeant perspective and the Zen master perspective. That often in our culture, you sort of have to choose between either I'm going to be an aggressor or I'm going to be a victim. Either I'm going to be one of the the exploiters like Elon Musk, or I'm going to be one of the exploited, like people who don't want to have to work, like you were describing, or like either I'm going to be really ambitious and care about outcomes at the cost of being a jerk and driving myself crazy, or I'm just going to like chill out and take it easy and not be that ambitious and sort of mock the people who are trying to be ambitious, right? That there's this dichotomy in our culture. And what Rand saw was like, these are both wrong. Like this whole dichotomy, like these are just two wrong. These are like fundamentally, they're making the same kind of basic mistakes about human nature and about the world. And both are sort of excluding the builder from their cosmic picture. Like that they're excluding the kind of like what really I think is the distinguishing characteristic of human beings, right? Like that we create value through reason, and that we can actually adapt nature to our values and to our needs and to our vision, rather than just having to kind of instinctually adapt ourselves to nature, right? And that's how we survive, and that it's work, that it's not automatic. It doesn't just happen, sort of for us by road or by there's no guarantee that we're going to make our way in the world, that we're going to succeed, that we're going to flourish. And it's up to us, meaning that fundamentally, unless we're, like really living in an evil dictatorship where sort of like basic freedom of speech and freedom of action have gone to hell, like by and large, it really actually is up to us. Like we actually really do have agency to achieve what we want to achieve. And it's hard. And it takes a lot of virtue and a lot of practice. And we can do it. And it's almost never too late to do it. And so I think there's something really inspiring in that. And I think it's a secular worldview that is also really uplifting and really inspiring without giving up kind of reason and objectivity for the sake of being inspiring. So I think those are some of the main ways, at least, that it's kind of featuring now in my work.
Essentially, according to Rand, man is a value creator and a reasonable being. I don't use the word friend. I say value maximizer. My relationships are built on value and duty. So
interesting. Those aren't the words she would use either, but that's
yeah, she would have a problem with duty. But I like him. Ayn Rand did not like Kant. I'm Kantian. I like Immanuel Kant.
Okay. Fair
duty
enough.
Is important. So happiness is an irrelevant variable. You do what you must. So children have duties to their parents and siblings, and you can advance these duties without becoming emotionally invested in relationships. So I am duty-based and I create value. I am not really interested in friendships, because a friendship is really a trap. A friendship is a trap. I do value the institution of marriage, but marriage is a trap. It's just like what people call wage slavery. I'm in favor of free markets, but people are quick to argue that capitalism is a form of slavery. But if we're thinking more broadly, a marriage is just like a corporation and just like a friendship. In all relationships, you suspend your rights for privileges. So when yeah,
Yes.
see, yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yes, that's how most relationships operate. So it's just like employment. When you are an employee, you are suspending your rights for privileges. One privilege, money. Another privilege, health benefits. You don't want to show up at work at 8 a.m., but you show up at work at 8 a.m. because of the new privileges. You want more money and you want to invest in the education of your children. A marriage is based on love, but all relationships are governed by rules. You have to be considerate about the person's feelings. Let's say your partner wants children, but you don't want children. What are you going to do? Someone has to compromise. So in all relationships,
Or
we
break up.
create yes, compromise or break up. So in all relationships, there's just an exchange of privileges and rights. That's all you're doing. You're substituting one for the other.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I mean, so I don't think of rights quite the way you do. And I don't think of freedom, I think, quite the way you do. So maybe that's part of where our views kind of come apart on these things, because like rights mean something very specific to me. It's if you're talking about political rights, like we have certain rights in virtue of like the kinds of forced and kind of man-made constraints that if they're put on us, they prevent us from kind of living rationally and following our own values and judgment. For instance, if somebody comes and steals our stuff, right? Or if somebody beats us up, or if somebody defrauds us, and like where reason is no longer kind of operative, because we don't know when someone's just going to come and destroy what we've built, or when they're going to sort of, kind of pull the rug out from under us in terms of like the things that we think we own that suddenly somebody, like removes from our control or whatever it may be. So I think that there's like a very specific distinction between like I think we have a right to life and liberty and property. I think, but I actually quite like what the American founders came up with in that respect, though we have our disagreements. But when it comes to voluntary relationships, which for me all the ones you named fall in the category of other than if you're a kid born to parents, you didn't choose to be born to them, so that's like the one exception. And so to me that actually makes it even more important that we not put duties on children. Like there are requirements of civil engagement, right? And there are also rules put on us by reality, like gravity. That's a rule, if we count that as right. Like what goes up is going to come down. And like entropy is like things generally are going to move toward chaos and disorder unless we do some sort of work, put in some sort of effort to organize them and to keep them together and unified. Like those aren't rules that people impose, those are just the rules that nature imposes, and we have no choice about those. We only have a choice about whether we acknowledge them and sort of like work with them rather than trying to like beat our heads against them. But that doesn't actually make the rules go away, it just makes us helpless to work with them, right? It just sort of makes us fall. But when it comes to chosen relationships like marriage, or like a corporation, that the stakeholders of a corporation, or the employees and the employers, whatever, like everyone's making choices in those relationships, and those choices, in my view, they're only going to serve the relation. They're only going to serve all if they're going to serve anyone at all, only contingent on their serving everyone. So, if you're in a marriage with someone who doesn't want kids and you do, and you sort of like domineer over the person who doesn't, and you kind of push for having kids, like now you're going to be parenting with someone who doesn't actually want a kid. And now you're either going to end up divorced, or you're going to end up, in some ways, I think even worse for all concerned, kind of having to really like parent resentfully, and to not really prioritize the kid, and to not and to be resentful of each other, because now your life is not what you envisioned, thanks to having kind of sacrificed yourself for your partner. out of whatever, intimidation or guilt or whatever it was, right? I mean, that's different from like if you actually talk it out and you get aligned and now maybe the other parent is excited to have kids or whatever happened there, right? But I don't think that treating these things as shoulds, like treating these things as laws of nature, I actually think leads to a lot of misery.
You're
Because
right.
I think it sort of artificially removes our volition, which in fact we have.
You're right, Gina, and I do agree with you. Marriage is a voluntary relationship, and if you don't like some of the traits of your partner, you can always file for a divorce. But most people are not quick to file for a divorce. So my point more broadly, Gina, is that many relationships are really a form of social subjugation. Yes, you can always quit the job, but are you going to quit the job? You can always quit the marriage, but are you going to quit the marriage? So sometimes staying within some of these relationships will ensure that you're subjugated to an ideal.
I mean, I guess this brings us back to our earlier conversation about saying no, but yes.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you, Gina, but the broader point is that most people are not like us. They're not just going to, well, I don't know about you, but I will dump any relationship if it's no longer adding value. That's just me. But most people are not as cold.
So, I mean, I don't think I am probably the farthest thing from cold. And if anything, I've definitely had to fight myself for, difficulty saying no and things like that. Those are definitely demons that I've had
to,
for me. Or dragons I've had to slay. That sounds nice for you. Yeah. But I would also say, again, the important flip side of this is other people are tremendously valuable and joy bringing to me. And so it's quite, if I've gone so far as to marry someone or to, get into some sort of really like long-term commitment of starting a company together, it's because I have reaped tons of not just like transactional value, like I think a lot of what you're talking about, but like emotional and spiritual and psychological value from having them in my life and from having them as, from having the shared concerns that we're able to collaborate on and that we're able to kind of enjoy and mourn together. And so they're worth a lot of trouble for me. Like I'm not, there's a lot I'm willing to do and to give up without it being a sacrifice in the sense of like, at least, Rand reserved the term sacrifice for like things that actually you're giving up more than you gain. And there's no really good reason for it. Like none of that to me is a sacrifice. I mean, I've moved cities and I could imagine changing big, important parts of my career for the sake of my spouse and my daughter. And none of that being a sacrifice because they bring tremendous joy to my life. And I wouldn't want to, and I want their happiness as I want my own. And like all that is very much a calculation of value for me.
All right, I get your point clear. So do you have children?
I do. I have a toddler of age 2.
Oh, you're into children and marriage and stuff like that. Okay. So we're wrapping up.
I'm one of those, yes.
Yes, we're wrapping up now. But before I go, I must say this. Ayn Rand is vastly underestimated. I'm not fond of the feminist movement, but I do believe that had Ayn Rand been a man, she would have been more respected. Most people just don't know to deal with a confident woman.
Interesting.
Yes, and Ayn Rand is vastly underestimated. Had she been a man,
that's an interesting hypothesis.
She would have been
I don't know how I would test it, but it doesn't seem crazy to me.
Ayn Rand would have been a genius.
Maybe. I think at least some people would have an easier time with her. That's probably true.
Yes, yes. So to the average person, for Ayn Rand to be so cold and off-putting as a woman, that's a problem to some people. But that's why I like her.
Yeah, like I say, like I actually don't think she's the least bit cold. I mean, obviously, lots of people are put off by her, so in that sense, she's off-putting to a lot of people. But I don't think that it's in fact for coldness. At least if anyone's actually read a book she's written,
they don't understand her concept.
Her characters are among the the most like profoundly passionate, loving, complex, characters that you'll ever encounter in a work of art. They're willing to die for each other and go to bat for each other, and they have really profound relationships and spiritual values and concerns. So it's also, I think, a big misunderstanding of which, yeah. Anyway, but that's really interesting, and I think probably there's something to it, at least with a lot of people who kind of write her off.
Yeah, and Rand was a big paradox for someone who wrote so well and was so logical. You're right, her characters were really romantic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they cared about love and relationships. And Ayn Rand herself was a bit of a romantic. She wrote on art, and her husband was an artist. So she had an ideal in her mind. So she's a paradoxical character. But unfortunately, Gena, you have business to take care of. So I'm going to.
I do, unfortunately.
Yes, but a pleasure,
But
Gena.
this was
so
fun.
Awesome. Yes. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Lipton.
Yes.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, pleasure was all mine. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye. Yeah.